Patricia Coleman had been married to James for 14 years. She knew his coffee order. She knew the way he slept on his left side with one arm over his face. She knew he hated the smell of lavender and loved the sound of rain and always cried at the end of The Color Purple, even though he pretended he didn't. She knew his laugh. She knew his lies. She knew the specific silence that meant he was hiding something, and she had learned, over 14 years, to stop asking what. She did not know about Diane. She found out the way nobody should find out anything, standing in a funeral home hallway in Atlanta, on her way to the restroom, looking through a 6-inch gap in a door she was never meant to open. Both of them there for the same man, both of them his, both of them with no idea the other one existed. If you are watching this and you have ever loved someone who was living a completely different life behind your back, stay with me, because what Patricia and Diane did next is not what you expect. Subscribe to Shattered Crown Stories TV, a new story every single day. Justice is always served here.
Patricia Coleman was already awake. She had been awake since 6, the way she always was on the days she had an early shift at Atrium Health. She was standing at the kitchen counter in Charlotte, North Carolina, drinking her first cup of coffee and listening to her 13-year-old son Marcus argue with the shower pressure from upstairs. The number was Georgia. She did not recognize it. She answered anyway. A man identified himself as a Georgia state trooper. He asked if she was Patricia Coleman. He asked if she was the wife of James Coleman. He told her there had been an accident on Interstate 85 outside Atlanta at approximately 5:47 a.m. A single-vehicle collision. James Coleman had been the only occupant of the vehicle. He did not survive. Patricia put the coffee cup down on the counter very carefully. She said, "I'm sorry. Can you say that again?" He said it again. Upstairs, Marcus was still arguing with the shower. Downstairs, Aaliyah had come into the kitchen in her school uniform and was opening the refrigerator. Baby Zoe was still asleep in her crib. Patricia stood at the kitchen counter with the phone pressed to her ear and did not move for a long time. Patricia's sister Denise Washington arrived at the house within 40 minutes of the call. She did not ask questions. She walked in, found Patricia still sitting on the kitchen floor, helped her up, called the school to say Marcus and Aaliyah would not be in, took all 3 children to the neighbor's house, Mrs. Franklin, 2 doors down, who had been helping with Zoe since she was born, and put Patricia in the passenger seat of her own car. Patricia did not speak for the first hour of the drive. She sat with her hands in her lap, watching Georgia come up through the windshield, flat and gray in the early morning light. The kind of drive you do not remember afterward because your mind is somewhere else entirely. She thought about James leaving the house 2 days ago, Sunday morning, early. He had kissed her on the forehead the way he always did before Atlanta trips and said he would be back Thursday. She had been half asleep. She had not opened her eyes. That was the last time she saw him. A forehead kiss in the dark on a Sunday morning. She had not even opened her eyes. Graceland Funeral Home was on a quiet street in southwest Atlanta. Red brick building, clean windows. A small parking lot with 3 cars already in it when Patricia and Denise arrived early that afternoon. Patricia sat in the car for 2 minutes before she went inside. She was a nurse. She had been in the room when people died. She had held hands and monitored vitals and spoken calmly to families in the worst moments of their lives. She knew how to be present in places that hurt. She told herself this was the same thing. She told herself that while she walked across the parking lot and opened the front door of the funeral home and stepped inside. The man at the front desk introduced himself as Mr. Eugene Reeves, the funeral director. He was in his 60s, dark suit, the particular professional stillness of someone who has spent decades helping people through the worst days of their lives. He asked if she was Mrs. Coleman. She said yes. Something crossed his face. Very fast. Gone before she could name it. He said, "Please have a seat, Mrs. Coleman. I'll be right with you." He disappeared through a door at the back. Patricia sat down. She did not know what had just crossed his face. She would know soon.
Mr. Eugene Reeves had been a funeral director for 31 years. He had seen a great many things in that time. He had handled the deaths of infants and the deaths of centenarians. He had managed families who screamed at each other across caskets, and families who sat in complete silence for an hour without saying a word. He had once handled an arrangement meeting during which it emerged that the deceased had 3 common-law wives in 3 different states. He thought that had been the worst day of his professional career. He was revising that opinion. On his desk were 2 files, both opened that same morning, both for the same man. File 1, James Coleman, next of kin listed as Patricia Coleman, wife, Charlotte, North Carolina. File 2, James Foster, next of kin listed as Diane Foster, partner, Atlanta, Georgia. Same date of birth, same physical description, same vehicle, same accident. Mr. Reeves had opened File 2 first, earlier that same morning, when Diane called. The Georgia State Trooper had found 2 addresses on James Coleman, a Charlotte address on his driver's license, an Atlanta address in his wallet with the Foster name on it. They had notified both. Diane had received her call first. She had called Graceland within the hour. Patricia's call to the funeral home came later the same morning. He had confirmed both appointments and opened both files. He had not put them side by side until 9 minutes ago. He sat at his desk and thought very carefully about what to do next. He did not think carefully enough, because while he was sitting at his desk thinking, he had told Mrs. Coleman the restroom was down the hall to the left. Patricia had stood up, walked past the waiting area, and turned left down the hallway, and inside the arrangement room, Diane Foster was sitting at the table with her 2 children, the door slightly open. Patricia stopped walking. The arrangement room door was open maybe 6 inches, enough to see inside, enough to see the woman sitting at the table with the 2 children. Something made her stop. She could not have said what exactly. Maybe it was the children. Maybe it was the way the woman was sitting, that specific exhausted stillness of someone sitting with grief in a professional setting and trying to hold it together. Patricia recognized that posture. She had been wearing it all day. The woman at the table looked up. For a moment, neither of them moved. The little girl on the woman's lap turned to look at Patricia through the gap in the door. She had the same cheekbones as Marcus. She had the same hands as Aaliyah. Patricia looked at the children. Then she looked at the woman. Then she looked at the nameplate on the folder on the table. Foster, James. She put one hand flat against the wall of the hallway. Mr. Reeves appeared behind her. She heard him say her name. She did not turn around. Mr. Reeves tried to intervene. He said something about a misunderstanding. He said something about needing to clarify some details. He reached past Patricia toward the arrangement room door. Patricia opened it the rest of the way. She walked in. Diane Foster stood up. The 5-year-old girl, Lily, pressed herself against her mother's leg. For a moment, the 2 women stood on opposite sides of the arrangement table and looked at each other. Patricia said, "How long?" Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 9 years. You? Patricia said, 14. Another silence. Did you know? Patricia said. No, Diane said. Her voice was completely flat. He told me he was divorced, no other children. Patricia looked at the boy, Cameron, 8 years old, sitting very still at the table, watching both women with the specific, careful attention of a child who understands that something enormous is happening, even if he cannot name it. She sat down in the chair across from Diane. Diane sat back down. Mr. Reeves stood in the doorway and did not know what to do with his hands. Tell me everything you know, Patricia said. Diane told her.
James Coleman had worked in regional sales for 14 years. The job required travel. That was the truth. It genuinely did. Atlanta, Raleigh, Richmond, 2 or 3 trips a month, 4 or 5 days at a time. Patricia had never questioned it because there had never been a reason to. The paychecks came, the benefits covered the family. He called every night when he was away. He always came back when he said he would. She thought about the calls now. Every night, from Atlanta. She had assumed he was in a hotel room. She had assumed he was tired from meetings. She had asked about his day, and he had told her about traffic and client dinners, and she had told him about the kids, and he had laughed in the right places.
She thought about the 14 years of those calls. She thought about the 14 years of him coming home on Thursday or Friday and being present in the specific grateful way of a man who had been traveling and was happy to be back. The way he played with Marcus after being gone. The way he held Zoe. She had interpreted all of it as love. She was now understanding that she had been interpreting a performance. He had been leaving one family to go home to another, and then leaving that one to come back to her, for the last 9 years of it. James Foster had met Diane Foster. She had not taken his name legally, she realized now, because he had never filed the paperwork, only ever asked her to use it, at a fundraiser for Atlanta Public Schools 9 years ago. He told her he was divorced. One marriage, no children, ended amicably years ago. He told her he traveled to Charlotte 2 or 3 times a month for work, a major client relationship that required his personal management. He told her Charlotte was nothing, just work, just a city he passed through. He had moved into her apartment in Atlanta 6 months after they met. Cameron was born the following year. When Lily came, James said he wanted to give her his name. He had talked about marriage. He had said they should do it properly when the time was right, when work settled down. The time never seemed to be quite right. Work never quite settled down. Diane had been patient. She was a patient woman. She had her career and her children and a man who came home to her most nights and called her every night he was away and was present and warm and good with the children. She thought about Charlotte now. She thought about what Charlotte actually was. Not a client, a wife, 3 children, 14 years, a whole life that had been running parallel to hers, 280 miles up the same highway for 9 years. 9 of the 14 years of his marriage to Patricia. James Coleman had 5 children. Marcus, 13. Aaliyah, 10. Zoe, 18 months. Cameron, 8. Lily, 5. 3 in Charlotte, 2 in Atlanta. Patricia and Diane sat in the arrangement room at Graceland Funeral Home and laid this out between them the way you lay out evidence, quietly, carefully, each piece placed next to the last. At some point, Denise came in and sat beside Patricia. At some point, Cameron, who was 8 years old and tired and confused, fell asleep in his chair with his head on the table. Lily had stopped pressing herself against Diane's leg. She was drawing something on the back of a funeral home pamphlet with a pen she had found in her mother's bag. Patricia looked at Lily's hands as she drew. Aaliyah had those same hands, the same slight left-handedness, the same way of holding a pen with the thumb tucked under. She looked at Cameron sleeping. James Coleman had given these children the same face and then divided them between 2 cities and 2 women who had never been allowed to know about each other. "What do we do now?" Diane said. Patricia looked at her for a moment. "We find out everything," she said, "and then we make sure our children are taken care of." "Together?" Diane said. Patricia thought about that word. "Together," she said. They drove back to Charlotte together. Patricia drove. Diane sat in the back seat with Cameron and Lily. Denise followed in her own car. It was the strangest drive of Patricia's life, which was saying something given how the day had started. Neither woman talked much. They had said what needed to be said in the funeral home. Now there was just the highway and the children and the particular silence of 2 people who have been handed the same catastrophe and are each trying to figure out how much of it they can carry. By the time they got to Charlotte, Patricia had made 3 decisions. 1. The children would not be separated from each other. Whatever came next, Marcus and Aaliyah and Zoe would meet Cameron and Lily, and they would understand they were siblings. 2. She needed to know exactly what James had financially and where it was. 3. She needed an attorney today, not tomorrow. Diane and the children stayed that night at Denise's house 2 streets over. It was the practical solution. It was also the only one available. Nobody discussed it at length. Denise made up the spare room without being asked. Patricia called Victoria Cross at 8 o'clock that evening. Victoria Cross was a Charlotte family law attorney who'd been practicing for 22 years and had handled every variation of matrimonial catastrophe the city had to offer. She had never handled this particular variation. She said she could see them first thing in the morning and that she would also bring in her investigator, a former insurance fraud examiner named Gerald Webb, to begin pulling financial records immediately. James Coleman had a $600,000 life insurance policy. He had taken it out 7 years ago, 2 years after he and Diane had been together, 7 years into his marriage to Patricia. The sole beneficiary listed was Diane Foster. Patricia Coleman was not mentioned anywhere in the policy. Patricia sat in Victoria Cross's office and listened to this information delivered in the flat, careful tone of an attorney who has learned to present devastating news without commentary. Patricia had been a nurse for 16 years. She had learned the same skill in a different context. She recognized it when she heard it. "How is that possible?" Diane asked. "He told me it was just a policy. He said it was for the children." "It is for the children," Victoria said, "but it is also exclusively for you and your children. Mrs. Coleman and her children receive nothing from this policy." Patricia did not say anything. She had 3 children and a mortgage and a dead husband and a $600,000 insurance policy that had been taken out in the name of a woman who had also not known she was the other woman. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "What are our options?" Victoria Cross called them both back the following morning with what she had found overnight. Under North Carolina law, she said, a legally married spouse cannot be excluded as a beneficiary from a life insurance policy without their written, witnessed consent. The policy James took out 7 years ago did not include Patricia's consent. She was not notified. She did not sign anything. "Which means," Diane asked, "which means the policy as written is potentially fraudulent," Victoria said, "which means it can be challenged." Diane was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know," Diane said. "I want to be clear about that. I did not know he was married when he took out that policy. I did not know any of this." "I believe you," Victoria said, "and that matters because what comes next requires both of you to work together rather than against each other. If you challenge this separately, the insurance company will delay for years and potentially pay nothing to either of you. If you challenge this together as joint claimants with a single legal strategy, you are in a significantly stronger position." Patricia looked at Diane. Diane looked at Patricia. They had known each other for less than 24 hours. They had been deceived by the same man for a combined 23 years. "Same attorney?" Diane asked. "Same attorney," Patricia said. Victoria Cross filed the challenge to the insurance policy on a Thursday. James Coleman had been buried the week before in a private graveside service in Charlotte. Patricia had arranged it alone. She had kept it small, immediate family only. Denise and her husband, Patricia's parents, James' mother, who had driven up from Augusta in silence and stood at the graveside and did not speak to anyone. No colleagues, no neighbors, no one from Atlanta. She had buried him. She had not forgiven him. Both things were true at the same time, and she had stopped trying to make them agree with each other. The filing named both Patricia Coleman and Diane Foster as joint claimants against the estate of James Coleman deceased and against the fraudulent exclusion of the legal spouse from beneficiary designation. The insurance company's response arrived within 2 weeks. It was exactly what Victoria had predicted. They questioned the validity of the challenge, questioned whether Patricia had standing to contest a policy she had not known about, and suggested that the matter might require extensive investigation before any determination could be made. Extensive investigation, Victoria told them in her office, is insurance company language for "we are hoping you run out of money or patience before we have to pay anything." Patricia did not have the luxury of running out of patience. She had a mortgage and 3 children, and a hospital job, and a dead husband, and a $600,000 life insurance policy she had never known existed and would not see a cent of. "How long?" she asked. "If we push hard," Victoria said, 6 months to mediation." 6 months. Patricia looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked back at Victoria. "Push hard," she said. Diane Foster gave Victoria Cross 9 years. She had kept everything. Text messages going back to the beginning, photographs, a joint savings account James had opened in both their names for the children's education, $47,000 in it. Emails, the lease on the Atlanta apartment that had his name on it as a resident. School enrollment forms for Cameron and Lily, where James had listed himself as father with the Foster name. Medical records for both children naming James Foster as the father. 9 years of a life that was completely real to her and completely unknown to Patricia. Victoria went through the documents for 3 days. "This is better than I expected," she told them both. He wasn't just telling Diane he was divorced. He was legally and administratively building a second identity. Different name on every Atlanta document. Consistent use of Foster for 9 years across financial, medical, and school records. This goes beyond adultery. This is identity fraud. "Can we use that?" Patricia asked. "Against the estate? Yes," Victoria said. "Against the insurance company's claim that the policy was legitimately structured? Absolutely." Diane sat quietly for a moment. "I want to be clear," Diane said. "I am giving you all of this because my children deserve to be taken care of, not because I want money. Because Cameron and Lily did not choose any of this." "Neither did mine," Patricia said. They looked at each other across the table. There was no warmth in it, but there was something else, a recognition. The mediation was held in Charlotte 6 months after Victoria filed the challenge. A federal mediator, a conference room, the insurance company's attorneys on one side of the table, Victoria Cross on the other with Patricia and Diane. The insurance company had clearly expected the 2 women to arrive separately, to arrive with separate attorneys, to arrive as adversaries whose competing claims would allow the company to argue that the policy was too contested to pay at all. They had not expected 1 attorney and 2 women sitting side by side. Victoria laid out the case in 90 minutes. The fraudulent exclusion of the legal spouse, the 9-year identity fraud documented across dozens of records, the joint savings account opened in a false name, the insurance policy structured to exclude the legal family in violation of North Carolina statute. The insurance company's lead attorney asked for a recess. They took 45 minutes. When they came back, they were ready to talk about numbers.
James Coleman had been a meticulous man. Victoria's investigator, Gerald Webb, spent 3 weeks pulling records, and what emerged was not the picture of a man who had stumbled into a second life by accident. It was the picture of a man who had engineered one with considerable care. He had maintained 2 separate email accounts for 9 years, 2 separate phones, the Charlotte phone and the Atlanta phone. He had told Patricia the Atlanta phone was a work device. He had told Diane the Charlotte phone was a client line. He had paid the Atlanta apartment lease from a separate bank account Patricia had never known about, funded from a portion of his commission income that he had rerouted before it appeared in the joint account. He had attended Cameron's school events as James Foster. He had attended Marcus's school events as James Coleman. He had coached Cameron's baseball team for 2 seasons. He had coached Marcus's soccer team for 3. He had spent Father's Day in Atlanta with Diane and Cameron and Lily every single year for 9 years. In Charlotte, he had never spent the actual Sunday. He had substituted the Saturday before or after, telling Patricia his schedule never allowed the exact day. She had accepted it. It had seemed like a small thing.
His children in Charlotte had never known he had children in Atlanta. His children in Atlanta had never known he had children in Charlotte. 5 children, same face, same hands, 2 cities. He had done this for 9 years without a single structural failure. The only thing that ended it was a car accident on a Tuesday morning at 5:47 a.m. Even in death, he had almost gotten away with it. James had one brother, Terrence Coleman, 48, who lived in Augusta and had known about Diane for 8 years. James had told him over drinks one evening in 2018. Terrence had been furious. He had told James he needed to end it. James had said he would. He never did. Terrence had not pushed further. He had told himself it was not his business. He had come to Charlotte for Thanksgiving every year since and eaten at Patricia's table and played with her children and said nothing. Victoria located Terrence through the estate process. He came to Charlotte voluntarily. He sat in Victoria's conference room and looked at the table the entire time. Patricia was in the room. Diane was in the room. "I want to say I'm sorry. I know that's not enough." "It isn't," Patricia said. "It really isn't," Diane said. Terrence did not argue with either of them. There was also James's colleague, David Park, who had suspected something was wrong with James's travel patterns for years and had chosen not to ask. David's non-involvement was less egregious than Terrence's. He had not known specifics, but he had known something and had looked away. Patricia thought about all the people who had sat at her table, who had been in her house, who had played with her children, who had looked at her and said nothing. She added it to the accounting. She did not say it out loud. She just added it to the accounting and kept moving.
The settlement took 3 days to negotiate and 2 hours to sign. The insurance company, faced with documented identity fraud and a legal exclusion that violated North Carolina statute, settled for the full $600,000. Victoria structured the distribution as follows: $400,000 placed in a jointly administered trust for all 5 children, Marcus, Aaliyah, Zoe, Cameron, and Lily, in equal shares. The remaining $200,000 split equally between Patricia and Diane as the 2 adult victims of James Coleman's fraud. The estate itself, James's savings, his retirement account, the equity in the Charlotte home after the mortgage was cleared, totaled $340,000 after debts. The estate was divided equally between the 2 families. Patricia's family received $170,000. Diane's family received $170,000. Neither woman had expected equality. Both women had come prepared to fight for it. They did not have to fight. Victoria had built the case so cleanly that the estate's administrator had no legal basis to favor one family over the other. James Coleman had spent 9 years making sure these 2 families never knew about each other. In death, his money was going to both of them in the same wire transfer. The signing was on a Wednesday morning in Victoria's conference room. Patricia arrived first. She sat on the right side of the table. Diane arrived 8 minutes later. She sat on the left. Victoria placed the settlement agreement in front of each of them. Neither woman spoke for a moment. Then Diane said, "How are your kids?" It was such a normal question, such a completely ordinary question to ask in such a completely extraordinary situation. Patricia looked at her for a moment. "Marcus is angry," she said. "Aaliyah is quiet about it, which worries me more. Zoe is too young to understand." "Cameron knows more than I wish he did," Diane said. "Lily keeps asking when Daddy is coming home." Patricia nodded. "I don't know how to answer that either," Diane said. "You tell her the truth," Patricia said, slowly, in pieces, as much as she can hold at a time. Diane looked at her for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." They signed.
6 months after the settlement, Patricia Coleman sold the Charlotte house. She had thought about keeping it. The children had grown up in it. Marcus had measured himself against the kitchen door frame since he was 4 years old.
But the house was also the place where James had kissed her on the forehead on Sunday mornings before driving to Atlanta. Every room had something in it she did not want anymore. She bought a townhouse 4 miles away, smaller, hers. She went back to work 3 weeks after the settlement. Atrium Health had held her position. Her colleagues had been kind in the way that people are kind when something terrible has happened and they do not know what to say, which is to say they said very little and worked very hard to treat her normally. She appreciated that more than she could say. Marcus was in therapy. Aaliyah was in therapy. Patricia was in therapy. Even Zoe had a pediatric play therapist, which had seemed excessive until the therapist explained that toddlers absorb the emotional temperature of a household, even when they cannot name what they are absorbing. Patricia was learning things about grief she had not known before. She was also learning things about herself she had not known before. She had spent 14 years being half of something. She was learning what it meant to be the whole thing. It was harder than she expected. It was also, quietly, better than she expected.
James Coleman spent 9 years building 2 complete lives 280 miles apart. 2 women, 5 children, 2 phones, 2 bank accounts. 9 Father's Days in Atlanta, while Charlotte got the Saturday before or after and accepted it as a scheduling thing. 2 families who loved him and did not know the other one existed. He died on a Tuesday morning on Interstate Indy 5 and took his secret with him. Except he didn't, because secrets that size do not stay buried. They walked through the door of a funeral home and sit down across from each other and decide to do something about it. Patricia Coleman and Diane Foster did not become friends, but they became something harder and more durable than that. They became 2 women who made sure their children were taken care of, who signed the same document in the same room and made sure 5 children who had never been allowed to know each other would have what they needed to grow up. That is what this channel is about. Subscribe to Shattered Crown Stories TV. A new story every single day. Justice is always served here.